So good to see you all. I don't even know where to begin with Sarah because she has so many eclectic, different tributaries that she's gone down with writing and Gateless. But if you guys put stuff in the chat, if you already have, excuse me, if you already have questions, you can put them in the chat, and you can also just tell us where you're coming from, how you found out about today, all those things to orient us towards you. Oh, there's a nice group. Sarah, thank you so much for coming. I'm so happy you're here.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm just like, as we said, like before we got on, anything gateless, I'm obsessed with. And so I'm so happy to be with this community of people who all love writing and love you and love what we do.
Yeah, well, hopefully we won't run out of time because we have so much to talk about. But that's true. I was remembering before we got on the call how I met Sarah, which is honestly, I was in the back of a taxi cab with Terry Trespicio.
That's
And
right.
she was like, I'm going to send my friend Sarah to the next retreat, which was in Tennessee in like the
Yeah.
middle of nowhere. Remember that?
Yes, it was a Gray Bear.
It
That
was
was
a
my
great
very first one. And Terry similarly called me when she got out of the cab with you and was like, okay, you're going. You don't have an option. I'm telling you that you're going on this thing. And she had told me about Gateless for a really long time and that it had changed her life. And she was very much my like, I mean, still is. I look up to Terry Trespicio, who doesn't, but was very much my like writing mentor. She had been my like my editor and kind of like my manager at a writing job that I'd had. And so she was like, you're going, end of story. And I went, and it totally changed my life. Like I know it's probably changed a lot of your lives, but also Suzanne, I know we've talked about this. I loved it because I was like, I loved meeting you because I always am nervous about anything where like I don't know, like teacher situations. I had teenage parents. I'm very much a rebel at heart. Like there's like I'm always skeptical coming into situations like this. And we were standing by the boards where you could sign up for massage and Watsu and all this other stuff. And I was like, I think I was like, I had just turned 30 and I was like, what's Watsu? And somebody else explained to me like what it was. And you turned to me and you were like, I don't know. I just felt like I was drowning. It kind of felt like bullshit. And I was like, oh, I like that lady. I want to sit next to her when we get in the circle. I got in the room. You were the teacher. And I was like, oh, I feel a lot better about this. Great.
so funny. I'm like speaking out of the side of my mouth about the retreat center.
No, but it was such a good like I think you could see that my eyeballs were popping out of my head and I felt overwhelmed. And so I think it was more that you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna like speak to this person like a human in this moment who's feeling overwhelmed by all this," you know?
Yeah, like what do I? And then we got in the circle, and I was like, "Oh my God, who is that girl?" Like you just came, your first piece just like blew the roof off, Sarah. And
Well,
when was this? What were you going to say?
it
Sorry.
was 2017.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, it was fall of 2017. And I had just come off of writing this play that was about my family's murder and me having to clean out the house by myself. And like my brother was a ghost and my mom was a ghost. And then I had the like ghost, even though he's not dead, of the 17-year-old who killed them in this break-in, but he was limited to only the language from his confession. And I had like done the play and it had won a competition and I'd done the stage reading and it had just been like a very on paper, a huge success, and internally a miserable, eviscerating experience to be in that trauma and do that whole thing. And one of the takeaways from that experience had been when you're writing these characters that I realized that I had not finished my own personal work or journey on this. Like I had made all these myself and all these people characters, but I didn't know how to resolve all their endings. I mean, especially with Xavier, with the kid who killed them. I was like, oh, I actually haven't done this forgiveness work. And I like when I came to that retreat, I was fresh off of like finally doing that, doing all of this research, deciding to send him a letter and tell him this after this like deep dive thing. But that first piece that I wrote was the first thing I ever wrote. Like in any sort of situation, describing what this process had been of forgiveness, trying to like metastasize it into something that made sense beyond my own personal work. And I think that's the first piece I wrote in the circle was just like trying to make sense of this whole thing. And I think maybe it was over the course of like several pieces. Like I was talking about like the experience of coming home and finding this out about my mom and brother. And then the forgiveness piece was like maybe the second piece. But you know, when you go on these retreats, what was their lunch in between those two pieces? And so, but it did kick off this whole, I came back from that retreat. And that was like the end of 2017, my whole career changed because I got that TED Talk talking about forgiveness. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had a space where I could safely distill those ideas and think about, like, okay, I had this experience, but what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to, okay, so I forgave him. Like, why, what does that mean to anyone else except for me? And what does that mean in like this greater cultural context? And then at the same time, I had been pitching Hallmark after somehow Murder Play. My producer for that put me in contact with a producer at Hallmark who I adore, Ashley. She was very skeptical to hire me because again, she doesn't like everybody sends her writers. And also, you know, I'm being hired off of Murder Play. She was like, okay, here are the rules, send me 10 pitches. And I sent her 10 and she was like, okay, great, I would make all of these. That's annoying. Let's focus on these two. And so within the same week, maybe 2 months after that retreat, I got the TED Talk and Hallmark told me that we were going to make two movies together based on those two pitches. And I think a lot of that, I'm like, sorry, I launched full into this.
Oh, it's
Um,
perfect. It's perfect.
I really think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that my process before that was very reliant on being hypercritical in order to get my work done. Like I was a straight A student who then went to college and then went to a music conservatory. And like classical music, opera is, I mean, it's everything you think about ballet, it's anything you think about disciplines that are really reliant on like repetition, repetition, but also it is just a criticism machine in a way that like I think even academia can sometimes be a little more forgiving because it's not your physical body and it's not like the rap across the knuckles again. Okay, why don't you sound like this? This is the way things are supposed to sound to be good. And I'd really internalized a lot of that. And I think I had a lot of great ideas, but I didn't have a healthy system for like generating work in a way where that voice wasn't just tearing things apart. Or sometimes I was pushing, pushing, pushing myself, like with that play. And even if the outside world approved of it and loved it and was like, oh, this is so interesting, I did not have a healthy way of protecting myself in that process. And so I think a lot of the stars aligned and my career started to take off because there was like actually this structure. Like I know Gateless feels very warm and fuzzy, but there's like a really core structure and set of rules and a thing at the core where when you don't know what you're doing that you can lean back on and go, wait, no, we're not talking about the work this way yet. Wait, no, this actually isn't about me, which is why we talk about this in the third person. So I'm going to get my ego out of this for a second. Like all of those things really liberated me to go into a more full-blown career as an artist and as a writer and know that I had the tools to protect myself in that process and to liberate myself to not worry what something was before it was bought or sold or legitimized by the outside world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And like when you went from playwriting into, I think after that retreat, you were working on more sort of a memoir project, like overall. And then, but you were also working on film, right? You were working on your screenplays. Um, and many of them. And then you sort of the work sort of led you to your current project. But like how do you talk to yourself when you're using writing and the spirit of the word and the whole kind of gateless um backdrop? How do you talk yourself into permission? Like, okay, I'm gonna let myself do that. I'm gonna let myself go from playwriting to the memoir, and then I'm gonna let it morph into this other thing. I'm gonna move into screenwriting because I know I'm good at that, and that'll be a bread and butter. Like, how are you talking to yourself through all these transitions as a writer and allowing yourself to be really big around medium, sort of like the different genres and mediums?
I think a lot of it, well, I mean, I already had to do a really big swing going from music to writing in the first place. Like that was already this very weird, huge leap. But I think a lot of it for me was differentiating or like breaking down this idea that writing to me is a skill and it's craft and it's like that is it. My pen comes with me everywhere. And um I just have to decide what game I'm inside of. Like the medium is just what sport or board game we've decided to wake up and play today, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that like some of that may have been overconfidence, but some of it is also sitting in a room in something like a salon and realizing that everybody is writing in completely different mediums, right? Like some people are writing memoirs, some people are writing novels, some people are writing different things, but when it comes to craft, we're anchoring in the same things over and over again. And if like writing is writing and craft is craft, then when I was going from playwriting to writing a movie, I didn't tell myself, oh, well, I've never written a movie before. I said to that producer, hey, I've never written a movie before. But I'm confident that I know how to write and that I'm good at scripts. So if you're okay with me asking a lot of questions about how this goes, and I promise not to waste your time with them, but I'm going to be transparent about what I don't know how to do and like ask a lot of questions about the brand, about how you guys do things, about what your audience specifically wants. I'm going to ask you formatting questions, or I'm just going to ask you for examples right from the top. When I was making that transition, I just said, can you send me 5 scripts that you love, that you've produced, so that I can see that and have that as reference? And then I could go through sort of the same way we do in a salon, gatelessly, and say, like, oh, okay, this is like over the course of 5 scripts, this is why this is working. Oh, okay, I'm getting an ethos of what Hallmark is now, right? Um, and I think that like that might seem like I've had other friends tell me that that's oh well you're just really confident. Like you're just really confident that you can jump in with both feet and figure things out. But that also comes from taking that chance and falling on my face a bunch of times and then realizing it isn't the end of the world, that it's okay to mess up and it's going to get messy, but that can't be that can't be an obstacle to trying and figuring things out. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you guys all feel this. Like, there's all these writers who make you feel like their first draft somehow was downloaded out of their head, like Athena from Zeus. And we all know that's not how any of this works, right? Like, that's not real. They're lying. That's a branding thing. That's that's not like that's not a real thing. But I feel like that's true for anything. Like, yes, Hallmark is particularly formulaic. But it's been also been true for me with like I don't know that TED Talks are super formulaic. There's a million different ways to do those, right? I don't know that that a lot of the other writing and essays that I've done, it has been sort of going in and being like, oh, what do I love about this? How do I spark to this? What's the Sarah Montana version of this? And knowing that it's going to be messy, not bad, because we don't talk about there are no bad first drafts, right? But that it's going to be a baby before it grows up. And I think part of it is being really transparent with people as you take the leap, being like, "Hi, I'd like to try this, and I think I'd be good at it, but I don't think I'll be immediately great at it." Has been a really liberating way to go, like to go through all of this. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And like I was thinking while you were talking that there's something, a quality about you when you start a new project that's and I'm going to tell you how it feels from this side, and then you're probably going to be able to articulate what I'm feeling. It's almost like you're meeting somebody there, like
Yes.
part of yourself or something, and you're like, "Oh, hey, yeah, okay, let's do this." You know what I mean? And that part of the self comes up with ideas and is like, "Let's do a film and let's like see if we can pitch this." And even the letter, to your family's murderer was like that. Maybe not without, but it was like, whoa, okay, you're offering this thing. I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna see. I'm willing to go with it. It's almost like a yes end to the creative part of the self that it does feel buoyant. Even more than confident, it feels like I can do this almost like a survivor way, or a way that's like interested in life as kind of, well, here we are, so let's just try these things. And I'm curious, like, have you always had that inside of you? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about, and I think that it's a couple of different I like buoyant is the right adjective there. And I think as you were talking, what came up for me when you said it's a survival skill, creativity is how I've survived. Like creativity is not just on the page and it's not in an art form. Creativity is having three brothers who all want the same Gatorade bottle and figuring out what we're going to do, like how we're going to split up this resource in the pantry, right? When there's only one left. Like creativity is, my parents were both like, I mean, my dad is still, and my mom, wherever she is, I guess still is, like hyper intelligent people, but who had me really young and then didn't get to follow a traditional path in this world, right? Like they both were like huge forces in their community for good and volunteering and all of these things. But everywhere we went as a family, and this is sort of multi-generational, I think, I, at least as a child, internalized this idea that like part of the fun was being a force for good, but being a surprise. Like the expectation is always, oh, there are these teenagers who had kids. And it's like, well, yeah, but they're also straight A students who got into UVA. They just had kids when they were teenagers. There was something about observing how the adults in my environment had to play with expectation and then subvert it because that expectation did not match who they were at their core, that I think was internalized at a young age, that could be a wound, and it sometimes was a wound, but it also was something you could be playful about, and that could sort of break down labels and break down barriers so that you wouldn't feel as stuck in one thing, right? There was permission if you're having to defy the odds from the beginning, then like you get to defy the odds or expectations or sort of create your own path. And like, instead of following the hedge maze, just like, I don't know, like use the hedge clippers and make your own way out straight to the exit if you want to. And so I think that part comes from having super creative, super smart parents who also had something to prove, I think that piece of it is personal to me. But I also think for everybody, creativity is a survival skill, and it's one that we try to focus on just being in art, but like you're being creative when you're a mom and you're teaching your kids that like this ramen packet has to be spaghetti today. You know what I mean? You're being creative. I watched my mom and my dad both be creative in all these ways that like weren't going to go into art galleries, but like the sets that my mom painted for these plays that I would direct with kids when I was in middle school and high school were like, she made these huge paper stained glass windows for Macbeth that had scenes from Macbeth all through them, right? Like it's I don't know, there was also this sense that creativity might not always be attached to accolades. And the world might
Mhm.
never notice the glory of what you're doing, but you have to own your creativity because that's your best friend. And that's the thing that makes life colorful and exciting and interesting. I do think that has been there my whole life. And I also think that because of that upbringing, there is a little bit of like, I don't know, I'm not somebody who, like the Hallmark stuff is interesting because obviously it's, um, like I always have, this is the other part that you said that I think is really interesting. Like I'm also trying to find parts of myself to meet them in the work and like to make sure that all the different parts of myself get fed. And so that means that you can't limit the scope of what you're doing because that means limiting the amount of yourself that gets fed in your work. And like, I don't just mean the work that gets you paid, but like the whole time I was like in 2019, I was writing for Hallmark movies, and I could not just be the person who wrote Hallmark movies and rom-coms, no matter how fun it is, because there was this like dark, deep part of me who had experienced these murders, who like I had to write a memoir. I had to have a place for that work to go so that like the world wants so badly to tell you who you are. And what we choose to invest our time in and the work we decide to pour into is how we fight back against that assumption and tell the world who we are. Even when that work's not public, it's like this is how we keep cultivating every part of the self and say, no, 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 I'm not a Hallmark writer. I'm a writer. I'm Sarah Montana. No, 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 no. I'm not the girl who lived like Harry Potter. I'm Sarah Montana, and I also know how to write love. And I know how to write things that make people feel like they can hope again, no matter what I've experienced. And like for a long time, my career felt like it had to be split into these very disparate buckets because of that. It was very compartmentalized. And it's only really been post strike 2023 because I had a really hard We had a lot of really hard stuff happen in the pandemic, as I'm sure everybody did. And that was a moment where I went, okay, there might have to be like there's Sarah practically who needs the bills paid, and that's Hallmark movies, and that's sometimes going out and doing workshops and public speaking and all of these things. Then there's Sarah who needs creative projects that like light her hair on fire and make her want to get out of bed every morning. And like, I don't know that those things can stay as separate, but at the same time, when they get combined, I've been through enough processes now that I know what happens to your favorite work once you have an editor or a producer, or it goes in the editing room floor and it gets chopped up, right? So a lot of it has been like, how do we integrate that in a way that's safe? How do I integrate more parts of self into more cohesive projects instead of it staying so separate? And also really thinking about like that memoir that I was working on. I got to a point with that book where I felt like I definitely had to stop. And I didn't want to put that out into the world, even though I had written, I don't know, 350 pages in that book. Yeah, I have a Google Drive folder with like 350 pages of material. And I still got to a point where I was like, I don't think that this is for the world. I think that this was for me, and this was actually a training ground for the next things that I'm going to write, um, which is painful, but also was immensely relieving. I think I would have really, really hurt myself if I had pushed through just because I said I had to write that book because I had started writing that book.
Yeah, I mean, when I listen to you talk, and I'm sure other people feel this too, it's like, oh my gosh, she's doing, union work, work in activism. She's a screenwriter, she's an award-winning playwright, she wrote a memoir. Now you're working on the other project, you do these viral talks. And I want to say that when you were in the Gateless Teacher training, one of your questions when we were sitting in one of the training sessions was, I feel like I waste time. This is what Sarah said. She was like, I feel like I waste time. I'm like, some days I'm just like still in my pajamas watching TV, or I'm walking aimlessly around the park listening to podcasts, and like I feel really anxious about it, like, oh my God, and I was listening to her, and by this time, I'd known her several years because
Yeah.
she'd come on retreats and everything. And I think you were in the academy or going to do it or something. I can't remember where you were with the academy then, but I really knew you. I felt like I
Yeah.
knew like how much was in your life in terms of the productive, side of your life. And I was listening to you like, huh, that's fascinating. And then someone came in the circle, um, which is why it's always great to let Gateless answer these questions. But she was like, "Well, there are these scheduling apps, and you can like you take your day. Remember this by like 10-minute increments or 15-minute increments, and then you put it on this app, and it'll schedule your TV your day for you." And Sarah's like taking notes about the scheduling app, and then I was like, "Okay, hold on." Like the sort of the Gateless energy was coming through, and I was like, this is what you do, and you look at what you've done, like you're not you are working in industries that need you to show up for meetings. You have intense deadlines. I mean, you were, how many Hallmark films did they contract you for? I feel like it was like 7 or 16 or
I mean,
something.
at this point, I've done. I mean, it's funny. At the time of that retreat, I had already had like 5 contracts. Had every movie made it to air? No, but like 3 had. Like
Yeah, in a
and that
short
was in the
amount of
span of
time.
like 2 years. Yeah,
Yeah, and you'd also had, you're also doing the TED Talk and then the other talk that went, I mean, it was like you were doing a lot, plus you're married and
yeah.
you had, a bunch of friends, and you're like really good at keeping up with, like, you ask Sarah literally anything and she knows something about it. I mean, she could connect with anyone because she's like, oh yeah, well, back in the 16th century when that woman was a saint, like she's, you're just like, wait, what? So I think what's really fascinating about how you work is like, you're working spatially. You're
Yes.
not, you're never putting yourself into these containers. And you also weren't like, I mean, you're a film aficionado. Like, well, you know how to talk about film and how to talk about the history of film and how to deconstruct really good film. And you weren't like, oh, I am too scholarly and academic to do a Hallmark film. You're like, no, this is fun. You know what I mean? And in that premiere, I saw a lot of your life that you had gotten to integrate into that film, and your family saw it. They're like, oh my God, you
Yeah.
put such and such, and you had fun with it. And I feel like you're letting yourself have fun with the creative career that you've built for yourself.
There was a guy when I first joined the WGA, I couldn't go to we couldn't I joined in 2020 and you couldn't go to meetings at first. Sorry, WGA is Writers Guild of America. It's the union for screenwriters and for TV writers and also journalists in the East. Not that that needed to be plugged. Um, but the first event I went to, I was like really nervous and I was like networking with these people and this guy was like, "What do you write?" What do you? And I was like, "Oh, right now I'm working on a Christmas movie." And he was like, "Well, I guess somebody's got to write them." And then during the strike, we're like walking around in circles in the picket lines. And that guy found me again. And he was like, "Hey, talk to me about how you got started in those Christmas movies. Because that actually sounds like a pretty good gig now." I was like, "Yeah, man, we can't like, I don't know. Sometimes like this academic idea, there's this snobby thing that like that only certain types of art are valid or worth our time, or that like what we create has to contain the entire breadth of our intellect to put on display for the world so that we can be validated. That's not why you have this. Like you have this big brain and this big spirit and this like ability to create because it can go into all different kinds of forms. And I think one of the things that was sometimes hard when I was writing the memoir was that it was this feeling that like, oh, I have to show everything. Like I have to show the entirety of myself. And now with a lot more time and a lot more work under my belt, I'm like, no project is going to do that. There's going to be parts of the self in everything. But the idea is that I'm going to write a fuck ton of stuff. And over the course of a body of work, people might get some semblance of an idea of who Sarah Montana as an artist is. And also, this is going to sound weird, having had videos and things go viral, um, I kind of hope they don't at the same time, as weird as that sounds. I kind of hope the work just gets to be the work and that people get to make it their own and it's death of the author and that I, Sarah Montana, you don't have to make a bunch of assumptions about who I am as a person or do an analysis on me the person, that the work gets to just be eclectic and be itself and do exactly what it's supposed to do in the world as opposed to it being attached to me at all, if that makes any sense.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And it's also like taking the creative or the word and deciding like whatever this is what I'm in relationship with. You know,
Yes.
the written word, and I'll go anywhere with it. It's like that thing that you're meeting, which is the creative, is also maybe the spirit of the word, and like, okay, I guess we're doing now, and not kind of building walls around it. Or it has to look like this, or it's not okay, or something like that. And then, you've met so many people doing this. You discovered your activism, you became a leader for the WGA. Like all of this stuff happened as a result of you saying yes, rather than no. But you have said no. Like I remember at some point you saying to me, like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not, this other stuff that you were doing that was more administrative and sort of in almost like a helper role. You were like, that's just not me. I want to create. I want to be creating things in my life. And that's what I want to make my money from, and that's what I want to do with my time. It was a definite commitment, but then once you got into that field of like, this is the creative field that I want to swim in, you let yourself say yes in a really beautiful way.
There's been this like this I mean, this was true when I was a singer. When I was a singer, every time that I was always split between opera and music theater. And every time I decided I was going to be an opera singer, my music theater career would take off. And then every time I decided I was going to be a music theater singer, my opera career would take off. And so I think coming into writing, one of the things that's been one of the adjustments, like after coming to these retreats and watching all these other writers too, and just, being out there in the world doing this, is that like, every time I've tried to tell a project what it's going to be, it has maybe this is me and what I bring to the work, it always rebels against what I said it was going to be, right? Like I thought I was going to write a play about murder and it turned into a TED Talk. And then like I thought I was going to write a memoir and it's ultimately now turned into like there, like I was writing the memoir, and then for lots of reasons was like, I don't think this is the right direction to go. I was like, I'm gonna write a TV pilot that's a sci-fi fantasy thing. And then I sat down with a Disney producer who was like, I really love this, but and I think it's really interesting, but you need to know we're not buying anything in this genre that's not previously created IP. And then I'm on a retreat with you crying about how I'm listening to everybody else in their books, and I'm like, I abandoned my book, and then there's this other book I want to write because I want to turn this sci-fi fantasy pilot into like a book, and you being like, honey, everything that you wrote for that memoir can go into that book. Like just sort of remembering that none of this stuff is ever really finished. Like there's no writing that you do that's a waste. There's no creating you do that's a waste. You just the same way that like you have children and you have no idea who they're going to grow like turn out to be. And also I imagine, I mean I don't have kids, but like I have brothers that I'm very close to. Like you like that journey never stops. Like yeah, there are these milestones in your head that you think you're like, "Oh my gosh, it feels like the pinnacle when they graduate from high school. Wait, okay, now they're graduated from college. Oh my gosh, wait, now they like have a career or getting married. Like they're with you for life. Like all these things that you create are with you for life, and they're going to take all these different forms and yet still be the same thing. Like I
Yeah.
tried to write a pilot and it worked really well as a pilot. But the problem with TV is that you can't have all the answers. You can't do the entire world building because it is very collaborative and people want to have a say. And so you can't box yourself in. Similar to like if any of you guys watched How I Met Your Mother, one of the problems that those creators ran into was that they decided what the ending was going to be like, 10 years before the finale ever got there. That's a hard thing to do in that medium. And then once I was like, but what if it's a book? Then I suddenly get to do all this world building and I get to do all of these things that the other medium didn't allow for. And vice versa. There are things that I've tried to write as a book that I've been like, this actually needs the guardrails and clarity and like the collaborative and visual process that comes from screenwriting. Or this needs to be a talk because it actually needs to be like an idea with like little story, gloves and hat and dress and like purse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally, totally. That's awesome. Yeah, and it strikes me that then that becomes sort of an ocean that you own, that you draw from, that
Yeah.
all those 350 pages. And some people will be like, do that kind of with their lives. Like they'll join the academy and they'll be like, and I have to, by the end of this, I have to have a book and then I'm going to sell it and then this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And it's like, you're about to start a love affair with the creative, honey. It's gonna make love to you every freaking which way, not just in missionary. Like you never know what's gonna happen. And so to have somebody come along like you who's like really let that the creative have its way and you're like but you're not laying down and just being like, okay, you're like, oh, let's try it like this. We're
Yeah.
sorry to extend the the metaphor, but it is that fun. It's
Yeah.
like you're really like having a blast with it, you know? And within that, there is like I remember you talking about using Gateless like in the editing rooms at
Yeah.
Hallmark, and that was one of the things I said to you before the call, like that you shifted the industry where you could. Again, you didn't just lie down for it. You were like, okay, I'm seeing how this is going, right? I mean, did you?
Yeah, it's like especially in like notes calls, right? Like I think one of the hardest things and notes calls for TV and film I think aren't that different in some ways than dealing with an editor and publishing. Like except that in this case like the producers are really my boss and ultimately like it is somewhere between this is my artistic baby and I'm the contractor who's here to make your bathroom. Like I'm gonna leave and they're gonna like they ultimately I'm creating a blueprint and they're going to build a house from it, right? And so but I did figure out like that I could be gateless with these producers in how both I received feedback and how I gave them feedback about their feedback has really changed that's how I've been able to build relationships and be somebody that people want to work with. There's a big difference between I've recommended other writers for Hallmark who have way more accolades than I do, right? Or I've recommended people for other jobs who are way more accomplished writers than I do. But if you can't come into the process and like and hold a mirror up to the person who's trying to give you feedback and say, hey, I like this was really strong. What you said here, like that was a really great note, or that point you made about the ex-boyfriend is like such a good thing, or what you're pointing out about the character arc, like I totally see it, instead of really getting defensive about the work. It doesn't mean abandoning the work. There are places where I push back really hard, where I'm like, I hear what you're saying. And I understand what the problem is. I think the solve might actually cause all these other problems if we go with that solve. So, can I pitch you three different options for, well, like, let's agree that that's the problem that needs to be fixed here, that's too many darkly lit interiors, right? For a movie that's supposed to be like bright and fun and make people not want to change the channel. Maybe the solve isn't more restaurants, maybe the solve is this, or can I give you options, has really transformed that process. But also, I think producers, because we as artists are so, this is so personal, even when we try not to make it personal and we want to defend our work and we've been in the forest for the trees. I always feel this like I have to have a little bit of separation from ending the creative part of the process before we get into the part where I get notes. And Gateless has sort of taught me to build up those boundaries and things. Like I've had a producer say, "Hi, like we haven't sent you the notes yet, but we're going to read them to you on the call." And I've had to be like, "Nope, you got to send them to me 24 hours in advance. I got to be able to read them first. I need to be able to process the notes on my own." And my reasoning for that isn't just emotional, even though some of it is that I'm a little bit sensitive. A lot of it is that it's a waste of our time if I'm on that call with you processing my emotions when I could be offering you solutions, knowing that like all of our time is limited. I could have already processed the note, gone for my walk with my little podcasts, taken a shower, and then in the middle of the night been like, oh, we should just base this on Eros and Psyche. Okay, I have the fix for this, right? Like I am clear about needing that time and space, knowing that everything moves really fast in that industry. But also I make it clear that like I appreciate them in that process. Like I'm talking about their strengths. I'm saying think like
Yeah.
like I'm acknowledging that they are also creative people in this process with me and that it like we don't get to like in a weird way it's like we're having a baby together, so everybody's got to learn how to co-parent, and this is going to be a really painful process if I'm really dug in on what my parenting style is, and I think you have nothing to add to this equation except that you're stupid and you have the money and you pay child support, right? Like that is a painful process all around that doesn't lead to we don't have to become best friends, but we do have to trust each other and we do have to like respect each other, and we do have to like admire each other on some level and be like, okay, you have this job for a reason, even if we're frustrating each other. Um, and I think that like the thing about Gateless when we give this feedback is you can't lie. I can't make something up that I liked about your work, right? I can't be like, oh, I really loved the characters if I'm like, yikes. I have to like dig into something that's like I love hearing all these pieces on retreat, but there's certainly once in a while there's like a piece that triggers you, or there's a piece where you're like, oh, that does that thing that like is not my style, but you still have to go into the work and the craft and be like, but this is really working. So what is working about it, right? And that as a frame for when you're dealing with people in a very high-paced, like fast-paced, high-stakes environment where there's like, they're not the most expensive movies, but it's $3 million on the line. Like that's not nothing for each of these projects to be like, oh, we have to meet deadlines. And also, if I don't get this in on time and we don't get across the finish line, that's like, hundreds of jobs that won't get to happen because I couldn't meet a deadline or I got frustrated about a note. Like, I can't do that. It's bigger than me. Like people will work crew and do wardrobe and lighting, and that's how they feed their families, right? So I also it's been a nice boot camp in the sense that it's like the work is strong enough that you don't have to be precious about it. It doesn't have to be a perfect thing to get out in the world and like make a difference in that sense.
Yeah, and I feel like you really have leveled the playing field like for everyone in terms of the word. It's like we were talking about how you went in and you were a speaker for like a group of doctors.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
And that you brought the writing to them and
Yes.
like yeah.
There's this group of OBGYNs who are amazing, who were having their annual physicians retreat. And the physicians every year, it's a surprise where they go. They don't know where they're going. This group, Mom Doc, they were lovely, lovely, people. And the CEO and this woman, Sarah, who was running the retreat, booked me to come speak to them, and I gave like an hour keynote. And the coming out of this, like what they wanted to really get out of this experience was, I mean, they're burned out. Like some of these doctors are the only OBGYN for entire rural counties, right? Like they are under pressure because of what's going on with funding, what's going on, what's been happening with healthcare. I mean, not to get overly political, but they're burned out, and they're doing everything that they can. And we're coming out of COVID, right? Like it's a really intense time for them. And so it was like, how do we get back into a space where we can like trust each other and we don't have to like each other, but we have to communicate well and work well and feel this sense of camaraderie. And so I did an hour-long keynote on the first night about community and like what does it mean to build community, and sort of talking through, the WGA strike, but also what community did in small batches and large batches after my mom and my brother were killed. Like, what are these real rules for community? And sort of like Gateless, how do you take a big nebulous concept like for Gateless, it's creativity. For this, it was like community. Like, what is community? How can we distill this down to just a couple of clear rules people can follow? And then the next day we did a gateless writing workshop, and I had them write, and I was like, why am I making doctors write? I was like, writing is like a transvaginal probe. Nobody maybe wants to do it, but you find a whole lot out by going inside. And then I was like, I know this isn't I know that for you guys this isn't your favorite thing to do, but here's what we're going to do. And I laid out the gateless rules, and I was like, why are we doing this way? I was like, you're in a job where your lives depend on you looking for what's wrong all the time, which is great for you saving patients' lives, but really hard for community building. It's really hard for trust in one another. It's really hard to like continue to see each other in a light where you can lean into each other. So here's what we're going to do. And I did three different writing prompts with them. And I said, I don't want you to worry about having a thesis or an abstract, or even get into the philosophical here. I just want you to write scene. We're just writing scene. And it's just about getting back into your body, because burnout takes, and stress and trauma takes us out of our bodies, right? And so we did a scene. The first prompt was a time, like the moment you knew you wanted to be a doctor or work in medicine. And that can either be as a child, or it could be the moment as an adult that you go back to remind yourself why you did this. And we read those out loud as a group of like 64 people, right? And did feedback, and I guided feedback with the big group. And then it got like a little squidgy, but the point was to build camaraderie. The second prompt, I was like, I want you to write about a time where your openness with a patient and your ability to connect on a personal level completely changed the outcome of the case for the better. And for that one, I was like, I need you guys to look at each other and tell me who your referees are. Like, who are the people who are explaining the rules on game night? Who are your people who are sticklers for rules? And I was like, everybody like pick for these 8 tables, nominate someone, and they each nominated someone. I was like, great, the gateless rules are here. I'm going to trust that you're adults and you can follow them, but I'll be walking around like, almost like the teacher looking over your shoulder a little bit. And I want you guys to read out loud and do this, and like try to get through as many people as you can. But I really did leave them to their separate groups to do this. And sometimes they broke the rules, but it was always in moments where they needed to in order to connect. And then I would be like, I'm going to let that go for a little while. But there was hugging and crying and seeing each other in this like completely different light. And then we did a third prompt that was about a time where you voiced what you needed and your team showed up in a completely supported you and blew you away. And my grandmother, who I call Grand Sarah, who works in she's on the board for a hospital. She's fabulous and has worked in healthcare for just a bajillion years and is brilliant. I ran the prompts by her in advance, and she was like, I would also say for that last one, if they've never experienced it, visualize what that would look like, which was just like brilliant advice. And then they got to hear, this is actually something we sometimes have a rule about in Gateless, but because this was a contained employer situation, they got to hear stories about each other through the eyes of each other about like what they had done that had actually made a difference. And you could see that people were like, I didn't know that that mattered to you, or I didn't know that I mattered in that sense, or I didn't know that you saw that in me, because you have this container of speaking to like what has strength, what has power, what works. And that's one of those moments where like in the last month, I was doing that. And then I was also doing this frantic rewrite on a Hallmark movie at the same time. And so that's again like compartmentalizing the self into these two different things. Um, but it just was like, right, like writing is like me, Sarah Montana, the writer, that doesn't always mean that I'm making things and sending them out to the world. Sometimes I am just as much a writer when I'm in the position of teaching people how to engage writing. Like being a teacher does not make me not a writer. Those are actually like, I don't think you can be a writer without being a teacher. Like, if you can't explain what you're doing and you can't articulate that craft to other people and you can't pass that gift on to people, um, I like kind of also don't know what we're doing here. You
Yeah,
know?
totally. I know, exactly. And you being willing really to go into that space. And also I think, you have you been through the teacher training 3 times or four? Three?
I think it's three, but the first time I was there like fully as a student, and then the other two times I was there as your like secret
Yeah.
helper.
My person.
Yeah.
It's always good to have one teacher. Yeah, but you went through it. Like, yeah,
Yes. Oh
too.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think the instincts that you had in that space really show that kind of instinctual understanding of like, okay, this group can handle this, or, this is
Yeah.
how I can like sort of move with the method with non-writers. And, it's a really beautiful example of sort of your facilitation in that room and how you're like, okay, what if I do this? And I know I'm going to be able to manage how much is going to come up because so much comes up. And I know because I live across from an OBGYN right now, the chief medical officer at Planned Parenthood, who's just like in the freaking weeds right now.
It's awful.
And
Like
you
it's
had
crazy.
64 of them.
Yes.
You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like
Yeah.
this is a person that's just who's very level, who's going through like so many vicissitudes. So to have 64 and then to think that the writing and the story could be the medicine to
Yeah.
get them into a community to know like I'm not alone. I
And I
have.
think if I wasn't doing things like that, then this other work that I do, where like, and I think this is true in publishing too, right? Like you can sell a book that is your heart's book, and you're going to have to go through the editing process and the marketing process. And like eventually that thing is going to become a business, right? Like there is no version of this where it's a job where like it doesn't get to stay spiritually pure through the process the whole way. Eventually, like it ends up exactly where it's supposed to. And that's like a very beautiful thing. But like when I make these movies, like I know going through the process, I'm like, the fun part is here in my living room, and eventually we're gonna have to deal with all this other stuff, and it can grind you down. Like it can drain you creatively to constantly be like Frankensteining these things, right? Oh well, now audiences want this. Oh, now we're worried that there's too much alcohol in the movie. Can we do mocktails? Like that back and forth is like, and understandably, because they're trying to, because one, like your book still has to make money, right? These movies still have to break even or make money. That element can be draining ultimately over time. And if I don't have this other outlet where I remember what writing is really for and like what it really does, then like sitting in a room like that and showing 64 new people the power of writing your story, or like even having those moments with myself where I get to do that for myself, where I sit down and write something because it's not for consumption. Like everything I do, I think one of the hardest, weirdest things about first becoming a writer was having to get to a place where I realized that like if everything I created had to become something and was up for consumption, I was going to dry out really quickly. I was never like, if every good idea or world that was fun to be inside of or project that sort of sought me out, if I like beat it to death with expectations, like a parent who tells you you have to be a lawyer when you're 5, it wasn't just that that project wasn't going to get off the ground, because sometimes that's a lie. Sometimes it did. Sometimes the projects that I beat into submission still made it to air or still got published or still did whatever they were supposed to do, right? It's about me over the long haul. Like I can't live in that space and expect that the work is going to keep showing up for me. The pool will run completely fucking dry if I treat it that way. Like I have to treat it with as much care as I ask it to treat me with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. True, true. So beautifully said. Yeah, that's so true. And it's always like sort of how you treat yourself is how you treat your writing and vice versa. It's sort of this infinity symbol. And so you can see a lot in how you're hard on if you're hard on your writing, hard on the work, expecting a lot, beating it down, saying no, being rigid, all of that stuff is like that's an internal conversation that maybe you want to take out and look at so that you don't beat yourself up and get tired. Um, I, Murphy Lewis, is here.
Perfect.
And she said,
That's
"Your
amazing.
and she's also a Gateless trained teacher, you guys. And she's
Sounds
in the academy
delightful.
this year for the first time. She said, give the work a hot Epsom bath in
I
10
love
minutes.
it so much.
I love that. That's so awesome. Thank you, Murphy. Do you guys have questions for Sarah? I mean, I know we talked about everything from like playwriting to screenwriting to how to live a creative life to how to use Gateless everywhere you go. um, to, viral talks and all of that. But do you guys have stuff that you want to say or
Oh,
how
I'm not actually writing video games. I just love them. But I
I
used video writing, like I used playing video games to help me with a project that I'm writing, which is like very circuitous. So I got served some scenes on TikTok to a game called Baldur's Gate 3. This is like so weird. And I and I was like, what is this? And Baldur's Gate 3 is this like this is gonna be so nerdy. It's like this Dungeons and Dragons style game, where the dice rolls sort of like it's basically like a huge choose your own adventure where they have had to write like I mean I'm not joking, there's like hundreds of thousands of decision branches in the story for this game. I think there are thousands of distinct endings to this game if you play this game through, and it takes like a minimum of like 140 hours to like finish the game. And if you do that, you've still only seen like I don't know, like, I mean, like, not even a tenth of what they've written for this game. And that concept was really fascinating to me. Like, I was not a video game player. I didn't know how to use a controller. I didn't know how to do any of it. And the first playthrough, I gave the controller to my husband and I said, you move the guy. We're going to make a person together. We're going to make a little bard, who's a singer, and we're going to go through this game and I will make decisions and you move the thing. And then, but I wanted to play again, and he was like, I don't know. And so I taught myself very slowly how to use this controller. But it was the like it as a medium, this idea that here is like narrative, it's all the same things we do in a book with craft, right? It's all the same things we do in a script. But they had to write thousands of versions of that thing depending on the player's whims and still make a good and satisfying story. And so like I was like, I'm willing to teach myself how to do this whole new, like how to use a controller in order to explore this medium like to its fullest. And it has changed my writing. It has changed how I think about story mapping. It has made things feel less rigid. It's like, yeah, but I've done I've probably done a dozen playthroughs of this game at this point because during IVF I needed to do something like distracting. And it's not as if there were 12 different stories that I played out in that thing and none of them was like some were more satisfying than others, but that tells me something about possibilities within the same story for what it's going to be. So it was a real like creative, um, yeah, just it was very inspirational. Larian Studios, if you want to hire me and you see this replay, call me.
feel free. I remember us talking about you getting into video games and you're like, I could write these. So, and I think we have someone in Gateless who is actually writing them. I'm trying to remember who that is. Um, okay, so Sherry Kaplan, who I love, she was in the Academy last year. I think she's coming back as an alum. Sarah, can you speak a little bit more onto how you decided that your memoir was not actually meant for the public consumption? Because I'm wrestling with this a little bit myself.
Oh yeah. I mean, don't let me scare you off. First of all, let me say that. I think that there's two phases of writing a memoir. The first is that you're trying to just get your entire story out of your body. And if it takes telling yourself that it's because this book is going to change the world and everyone in the world is going to read it in order to do that processing work with the writing and to meet yourself on the page, then that's 1,000% worth it. And like that book has to be written regardless, right? Like I had to write those 350 pages. That work could not be skipped. I think I would not be able to write fiction without constantly writing into different blocks. If I had not told myself I was going to write a memoir, written 350 pages, and then gone, never mind, I don't want to do this. The reasons that I didn't want to do this are complicated. I think some of it has to do with I did the TED Talk and I did another talk that went like mega viral that was about it was during Me Too era and it was about the murders, but it was also about sexual assault and it was about this idea of like how do we decide who we are when the world imposes labels on us. And yeah, when that talk blew up, I was getting thousands and thousands of messages in my inbox from people telling me thank you, but also the deepest, darkest things that had ever happened to them. And a lot of hate mail too, but the hate mail weirdly doesn't bother me as much. I had three brothers. I've been called everything. But speaking of those three brothers, two of my brothers were, and my dad, like I watched how my family sort of responded when I did the TED Talk about forgiving Xavier. And it is not that anybody reacted negatively, but it was this cascade of really complicated reactions because like in my case, because we're talking about a murder in a family, which is different than like writing about your divorce or writing a quiet memoir or like lots of other or sexual assault or something like that. Like this is an event that happened to so many of us. And I had to like really sit with like, of course, I have every right to tell my story. Um, but I also very firmly believe as the artist that we are responsible for what happens to other people when we share our story. If they are unwilling characters in that story, right? Like there was no version as I was doing this memoir, even in the play. My dad was a character. Yeah, like my dad, my dead mom and my dead brother probably aren't going to have any complaints about me writing a play, but I did do a play where family members had to attend and have their entire trauma re-triggered. And I think about how like when I did that video and there were like a million people had seen it in the first 5 hours that it went online, and then eventually it was like 30 million and then it's 60 million. I like walked out of my bedroom at one point and turned to my husband and I was like, a million people know that I was raped and that my family was murdered. Like at 5 o'clock and the video had gone live at noon. And I like there's this thing where I had to ask myself, like, do I need the world to know this about me, specifically Sarah? And I found myself as I was trying to move the memoir into the next phase, being so overly concerned with getting everything right that I found I could no longer be truthful, and like these experiences that I'd had and the wisdom that had come from them and like the thing that would actually be useful to the audience was a thing I would never be allowed to access because I would have to button everything up and make sure that I was being like as conscientious as everybody else's grief process as I could be. And I know that sounds like I'm being like oh poor me, or I'm restraining myself. I promise I'm not. Like there is a part that can be very irresponsible when it's like, because I'm doing my emotional processing, I must put my whole story out into the world and not thinking about what that will do to other people. Like what we create first, that first level is for ourselves in our processing, and then everything we create, that second level, once we're editing, it's for the world. It's not for us anymore. And my family is part of the world. Like, did I want to immortalize my whole family and their responses to this tragedy at certain moments in the snippets that would be the right thing structure wise for the story? And then do I have the right to give a part of my dad's story to millions of people without him ultimately having artistic input? Like, I don't know that I do. And I know that's complicated because like we do write about our families and we do, I think if it was a different kind of trauma, I would feel differently, right? But in this case, with this particular trauma and what it did, I I just became a real ethical quandary for me. And so the other piece of it is now that I'm writing this sci-fi fantasy book, everything that was in that memoir is in that book. It's about like past lives and like reincarnation and grief, and it's ultimately about like how do we get into cycles with people and when do we decide to let them go, and when is it holding on destructive and when is letting go actually healing, right? Like, and about and it's about a lot of other things too, but like everything I wrote, whole passages from that memoir, copy paste into this book, like not changing a word of it. Because because I did all of that work. But if I hadn't done that work, I think my fiction wouldn't look the way that it's starting to look. And so I think that, like, if you're burning to get your story out of you, always get your story out of you. And then for me, the next step is like, now how is this book for the world? Like what is it going to be to other people? And then what is my responsibility as an artist? Because I've seen people do true stories and be like, well, we have to tweak this real person's character to make the narrative make sense. And now there's like some HUD, so like my one of my friends wrote for Dying for Sex, which is a brilliant, beautiful show. They were like there was like a character that was kind of the bad guy that they had to tweak, and he's a real person. And so I was like talking to her one day and I was like, isn't it wild that like for millions of people who watch this TV show, because this is a true story, there is a truth that like millions of people hold to be who he is that isn't the experience that he lived at all. And that's like the power we have as writers and as artists. So I think that part is like we have to really wrestle with the ethics of that and actually like not in a way that should make us feel fear or shame, but like we have to know how powerful we are in that sense and like not shirk that responsibility.
I love that. I love that. And Lisa's asking, there's two questions and they're both really different and really good in their own ways. But Lisa's asking, how you get all these cool gigs. And I started to kind of answer a little bit. I was like, oh, she just like pitches and Googles and asks people and like now she gets asked or whatever. But is that true? Like, how do you get it?
Yeah, you know what I would say is like it starts with being confident enough to try one thing and then tell people that you're doing that thing. I don't have a lot of shame. I'm also not afraid to look like a fool. Like the last I was pregnant and had a miscarriage in 2021 and like you're supposed to wait until the second trimester to tell anybody you're pregnant. No, I told everybody I was pregnant and then I had to tell everybody that I wasn't, right?
Oh,
Like and so I like I think some of it is that, like, when I wrote a play, I told everyone I was writing a play, and then that led to Hallmark through this, like, really weird circuitous route where, like, the producer on that was friends with the girlfriend of a Hallmark producer who then, like, read my writing. You know what I mean? Like, I make all these connections because, or even the gig that I just did with all these doctors is because they saw a talk that I did on it was served to them on Instagram, right? And then the CEO of that medical group said, I want her to be the speaker this year. You have to just keep putting work out into the world, I think, and it makes connections for you. But also you have to be your own champion and not be afraid to say, like, yeah, I could do that. Like, yeah, I've never done that, but I bet I could take this other thing I've done and modify it for that. Would that be interesting to you? Like I had never done a like the workshop that I did for these doctors, that was tailored to them specifically. I didn't have that as a pre-designed program. The CEO and I got on the phone and talked through what he needed, right? So I think the gigs, it really is just like everybody will only hire you if they have proof of concept. And that means you got to create more stuff. And if you want to do something new, then you have to create the new thing. And then like that like you have to I look at it as constantly having a portfolio or like an audition book for all the things that I and that's why I make work even when I don't have a specific gig I'm aiming for. I have experimental little pieces I'm writing in a Google Drive so that I'm like, yeah, I've got this weird Cinderella piece that's at least close enough to demonstrate my ability, even if it's not exactly what you're looking for, so we can talk about doing that project together. Does that make sense?
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, this is what I'm trying to talk about with the buoyancy. It's
Yeah.
like you're meeting something inside the self that's excited about creativity, and the two of you almost, if that makes sense, are going for it. Like, let's try this, let's pitch this. So when the shame comes of rejection, that, it's like, well, I have this other thing I want to do. I have this other thing. It's like, it's all about this kind of ability to pivot in a way into another thing. It's like, I'm going to do this thing called the creative and the word, and I'm going to do it any way I can. And like, here's an opportunity. I'll go down that corridor, and then that's an opportunity. But it's not letting these people become God over you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is a banquet of things I could do with the creative.
And like I stopped pursuing institutions at some point and started pursuing people I thought it would be interesting to work with because institutions are crumbling around us at a speed that like I don't want to say is unprecedented because history's long. But like with everything going around us right now, I mean like and that started at the beginning, some of that is being a millennial. Like I graduated into a recession and institutions have been slowly like ka-chunking right apart around us politically and economically and technologically, and so I've had to like get really clear on this is part of like why even the AI piece of it doesn't it scares me about what it's going to do sociologically and economically. It doesn't scare me as a creative because like that thing has to be so divorced from product for me and so like tuned into like who I am and what I do and what this relationship with that work is that I have built a confidence that like I will adapt to whatever the world is interested in seeing next. Um because I'm not overly reliant on form or institution to validate or like get my work out into the world, if that makes sense.
Right, totally. And you understand that it's a fluid world. And the other question that I loved was this idea, and I know we're getting a little past the hour, so
That's
um
okay.
that you've managed to forgive the murderer. I mean, that's a gigantic thing. It's its own thing, and there's a whole talk about it, and we can put the link in the chat. But I'm interested in the second part of this question, which is like how resentment feels like it's blocking this writer for the creativity. And I know what I would say to that,
Hmm.
but I'm curious what you would say.
Wait, where's the question? Can I read the question?
Here, I'll put it because it's so small. I'll put it in the big. I just did it from myself
Oh
just now.
yeah. There we go. I've
So
experienced my
it's
opponent.
really
Where is it?
small type.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I get this. It's because like yeah, I think I understand the resentment piece. It blocks the creativity because um for me, in order for before I forgave him, that meant that I was trapped in playing a character and in narrative roles that were extremely fixed, right? Like he was the perpetrator and I was the victim. And those are like extremely defined roles. And there's power in that because you get to cultivate your anger and somebody else gets to be the bad guy and be to blame for everything that's going wrong in your life. And sometimes that anger can fuel you for a really long time. But the forgiveness, when I went on that forgiveness journey, it was not about coming to the conclusion that forgiveness was the end game. I went on a journey to actually unpack the word forgiveness. Like, what does forgiveness mean? And to be playful with that definition. And so I wanted to know what Buddhism had to say about it, Judaism, all these other things. I read all of these reports on 9/11 victims and, victims that decided to forgive versus victims who didn't, like what does this mean in a practical and applied sense, and really allowed myself to say I'm not trying to get to an arrival fixed point on this. I am like going to go on a long meditation about what forgiveness is and what I think it means, what it can do and what it can't do. Um and I think that like the creative, like the reason the resentment holds back the creative process is because resentment relies on fixed structures. Like that anger relies on a really fixed, like you are this and I am this. And that means that the creativity is already completely boxed in, that we can't move past that thing. I had to like and look, I had to do this with a person who I frankly don't really know. And that was very difficult. It is easier for me to forgive sometimes, and sometimes I'll say sometimes harder in a situation where I can muster compassion because I know the ins and outs of that person very deeply. I knew this person's older siblings, but I didn't really know him like that. I certainly didn't know who he'd become. There weren't all these counterweights of like the practical world lived experience. It really had to be this okay, what is forgiveness and what does it mean? And like I let myself go on a journey with that thing and told myself, if you don't forgive him at the end of it, great, we'll go back to the play and we'll kill him in the end. There was nothing prescribed about it. Um, but I do find that my creativity dries up whenever I'm in a place where I haven't addressed my trauma, when the trauma takes over everything. I think some of it is a little bit about that like polyvagal work too, that there's like those different states where like you can be totally like in a I don't want to say good, but you can feel like in a normal like good open state, and then that next thing down is sort of fight or flight activated. But then there's this other state below that where almost like on a physical level where your digestion slows down when you go into shock, when you're like having to carry something for a long time, all your other systems slow down because your body is processing something that's so big and so heavy. And that's of course going to happen to your creative work too. And so like I try to think about it less when I've had really bad things happen in the past couple of years. We've had miscarriages that have almost killed us. We've had, drama on all kinds of different levels, physically, psychologically, spiritually. I mean, it's 6 month long strike. That wasn't easy. And I try to remind myself that like the numbness it's not the worst stage, but it's the deepest stage of the trauma. And the goal is not to go from numbness to everything's good again. The goal is to get back from numbness to fight or flight or anger or any of those things and be curious about that part, and then to go from that to feeling like health, like securely attached and receptive to the world and like a little bit of a sense of peace and curiosity. But like I can't be curious if I'm under attack. Like I can be alert, I can be hyper vigilant, but I can't be curious. And creativity requires immense curiosity. Like it is curiosity, I think, sort of like in its essence. And so I have to like really go into my body. I have to figure out which of those phases I'm in. I have to be like, you know what? Something has happened. It's okay if the writing's not going to come how it comes. I have to treat myself first for a little while here and then write through that. And I write through that process because writing can also be the thing that loosens everything up and helps me get back up those little levels, if that makes sense. I'll write into what I'm feeling. I'll write into the numbness. I'll just write, all I feel is numbness. All I feel is slow. All I feel is I'll have pages of journal that are just like, my brain is not working at all. What is going on? And I just keep going until we get up to this next phase. And I'm like, oh, now I'm pissed off. Oh, wait, now I'm really sad. Oh, wait, now I'm feeling hypervigilant. And then I write through that and pay attention to all those feelings and get curious about those feelings. And then we're like back to normal, not normal, but like curious, grounded, buoyant Sarah. And so the writing can come with me through all of those different phases, but creativity is different than the writing, if that makes sense. Like I'm not generating new stuff when I'm in those phases. I am having to use writing to turn the lens inward. And the bonus effect is by doing all that introspective work to get myself back to a place where I can be creative, look at all the gold I mined. You know what I mean? But that I think is different than being creative. That's like that introspective generative work and like relationship with the word and the page, like nets all of this beautiful creativity later. And it's like not a waste and it feeds into all of your work. But that's like the bedrock of who you are as an artist. That's not the like happy generative engine thing. Otherwise, if you try to keep the engine going without doing that stuff, I've crashed and burned a couple of times trying to make things okay.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I remember once being in a Zen a retreat with a teacher of mine, and I said, what do I do with this? You know, resentment or resistance or regret or whatever is like alive for you that is the result of trauma. And he just looked at me and he said, you let it in.
Hmm.
You let it in. And it was like this open door, you know, and as soon as I let it in, then I could do all sorts of things with it. I could look at it, I could scream, I could write, I could talk to somebody, I could, it's like just that's, I think, what we're talking about. And there are all these ways to let it in. But the minute we think, like, I can't do this and that, is the minute that we lose our perspective on our own agency and our own ability to, as you're saying, write through it. And you never know what those pages will become. You
Yeah.
know, sometimes you read a book and you realize this woman wrote right straight through this. And thank God she did, because now I'm here. You know, I've gotten books, manuscripts from people who wrote right straight through their heartbreak. And they were like, just gave me the pages. I don't know what this is. And then we turn around and we sell it for six figures. It's like, we need these stories. We need to know about your resentment. What is that word? It's
Yeah.
sentiment, right? It's re-feeling something that we maybe weren't able to feel then. So it's okay not to forgive. You know, you Sarah's like such a researcher and she looked at everything and she said to me once, like, it was grassroots, it was organic, it rose. I didn't
Yeah.
make it happen. I didn't try. And like whatever you're feeling as a writer, you can write right straight through it when you accept that it's all right to be there. It's like we are all there with you. You know what I mean? Every
Yeah.
single solitary one of us has those places that we're stuck and we're frightened and we're angry and we're rageful, and we want to hear about yours. So I just think this is so beautiful to say that you can bring the writing with you. That's just gorgeous, Sarah. And,
Well,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, and I just want to say that it's like that's where it gets to be a gift to you and it becomes a gift to us later. But that's like circling back to what we talked about earlier. Like you bring the writing with you through all of that and write straight through that heartbreak, but you don't go into the body to explore your resentment, going, boy, I hope this is a movie. Or like, boy, I hope this is a
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
Right? Like I think that's the difference there is like the pieces of art you love the most started as started for the self and then became something else. Like that's when it feels that's what we actually connect to in someone else's writing, not the like mandate that this has to be a product of some kind.
It's just amazing. And Sarah, I just have one more and then we will let you go. But I love this question and I just wanted to give her a chance to ask it. So Christy's asking, Sarah, I came up through the classic Hollywood pay your dues pipeline, CAA, production companies, writers' assistants, and TV writers' rooms. And I internalized that stay small, be agreeable, don't take up space writing. And what's wild is that no matter how much validation I get now, I still regress to the nervous assistant energy. Instead of actually receiving, I am past that season, and that people genuinely love my writing. You've talked about how Gateless shifted the way you show up. How did it help you undo that internalized smallness, people pleasing, and actually inhabit your own authority in that realm?
Oh my gosh, this is so great. And this is such a great question. And I think the thing about like being in community with other writers is because I get it. Like when I first started writing, I was also in like, I was also doing like production assistant stuff and I was helping these guys like write these weird, like do these pitches for these weird reality TV shows for like Food Network chefs. Like it was a very weird gig. That was how I met Terry. And like it is a very stay small, stay agreeable, like all of the stuff that Christy's saying is so true. And I think when you get into a space with other writers, specifically like a thing like a retreat or salon, it really became that there was this clear structure of like how we're not going to speak to each other, like we're not going to, and how we're not going to speak about our own work. Like it really was. It feels like it's actually supposed to be guidelines for how to not be mean to each other, but what it really is how to not be mean to the self. Like I think that's ultimately what this work is like I cannot do to myself what I am not allowed to do to another writer. And being in this room with people at various stages of like, some people were working on things they've been working on a long time. Sometimes people were responding to the prompt in real time, and that didn't change the experience of listening to it dramatically. Like, even if someone was just responding in real time to a prompt, or this was someone's like novel they'd been working on for years and they were just writing this scene, I felt so blown away by what they were creating. And like that process of really having to dig into craft and like figure out what was working and what wasn't, it gave me a little bit of like, it it strengthened my sense of authority over like writing itself and what this is and my ability. Like the more feedback I had to give to other writers, the more I was proving like that I knew what I was talking about too. You know what I mean? Like when we give feedback to people, I can't just say, wow, what a nice boat. I have to be like, whoa, you really picked out the right piece of wood for that. And like the way that you did this and the way you did that. Like, if I can articulate it, it means that I understand what happened and what I'm doing. And so that really like gave me a sense of like, oh, I really know what I'm talking about because I'm able to process my own feelings in a really short period of time about a work and then immediately attach to them to like, why does this work craft wise? And that's a practice. I did not walk into my first Gateless retreat being like, yeah, I'm great at this. I was like, wow, great stuff. Moved emotions, and then by the time we got through training and other things, I was like, oh, this is specifically what it is. This is what's happening. And but I think a lot of it too was realizing that like sometimes you're on a retreat and you get annoyed when someone breaks the rules, right? Like I get annoyed when someone sighs right before they go to read their piece, or I get annoyed when somebody breaks the like no disclosures, like, well, I ran out of time. Like I'm like, stop it. You're denigrating the work and you're like not respecting me or this space when you do that to yourself. And I realized if that's how I felt about other people doing that and doing those little disclosures or being self-conscious in a space that was supposed to be free of that, that was actually dampening my ability to do that because now I felt like, oh, we're having to like that now we're murky and we're back in that space of humility meets academia meets like just all that patriarchal bullshit. It made me realize that like, oh, I can't do that when I'm out in the world. Like people actually don't want me to be small. They say they want me to be small, but they don't actually want that. They want someone competent. They want someone who believes in what they do. They want visionaries. My friend Shannon, who works in Broadway marketing, is always like, we want the creatives to be divas. Like we do. We want you to be fussy and hard to deal with a little bit. We want you to be geniuses. Do you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
we know that comes with some difficulty. And so um, I think that's the step between like people have a very specific way they want you to act when you're the assistant, but then once you're the creative, like they want you to be that person. Like they do. They want you to be a little bit difficult. There are producers and like managers who are more likely to pick up the phone if I'm like, "Hey, if this is like this, I'm never doing this again." And if I'm like, "Hey, no problems if not," I'm not getting a response. Like, which for a people pleaser like me is crazy. But I eventually realized that it was like I'm not being difficult. They don't want to spend this money on me and invest in me unless they know that I believe I can do this. Otherwise, then they start to doubt, and then the whole thing unravels, right? So I have to like everybody wants like it's sort of like when you go into an audition. I've been on the other side of the table trying to cast someone. I want you to be good. I don't want you to come in and be afraid and sing flat when you could have been the person that like was my dream person to inhabit this role, right? Like I'm looking for you. If I'm the person who's on that side of the table, I am looking for the thing that's going to explode and capture public attention and like make the magic of this whole like movie or show or whatever come together. Like I'm looking for you. And I have to remember that like people are also looking for me. And that means that I have to like unfettered show up and be my full self in that thing.
Yeah, and I think it's not a crime if you don't, be a diva
No,
or
don't be a jerk. Let's be clear. Like, don't really be a diva.
it's
Yeah.
just that this is permission to maybe look at the part of the self, I think, for me, and be like, oh, I wonder what that part is that thinks that I am still back there. And I just think sometimes we're catching up to ourselves. Life is fast, we kind of have to oh, I'm here. And maybe you have to be there like a little while before you're kind of that's in the rear view mirror, and that's okay. It's almost like Sarah saying like you're gonna get there. It just takes a little while, like with her feedback. And I think Sarah too with the academy, when because you knew you picked up craft so quickly in the academy, I noticed you like took that vernacular very it's almost like it's almost like it was already in there and then you remembered it and you just like every single time we were together in an academy session or anything like that, you would start to talk in this language. I think it's very helpful to have the language of craft too, to be able to like take that agency and be like, I know about the global frame. I know about, the foundational need to ground the reader in the beginning. I know the compilation of a scene. And there is something about the curiosity and the research and the ability to like want to understand these tactile parts of what makes a great story that I really saw you lean towards. Like you're a hard worker when it comes to all of that, and you're willing to look at all of it and understand it and ask questions about it. And I feel like that makes you a really good writer, great teacher, and like somebody that people can rely on because what you know is very grounded in true craft and what it needs to be in terms of storytelling. It's just really it's hard to explain Sarah when she's feeding back, but it's just phenomenal, phenomenal. I mean,
I mean, I think like especially coming from opera world, like you're exactly right. Like for the academy, like getting to be a nerd about this stuff and have language for the things I'd been experiencing but didn't have language for it, right? Like I could read a book and know what I was feeling and I knew enough from, English classes to understand like the basic elements of story and structure and things like that, but to really be able to go all the way inside of this and be like that's the name for the thing. It's like when you hear a word in German that doesn't exist in English and you're like, yes, like that's like it's that feeling where you're like, oh man, why don't we have a word like Schadenfreude? Like that's how it feels to understand craft. It's like, oh, there's finally this word that is like a mishmash of things that encapsulates this part of the human experience I'm already having. I man, I love words. Words, make sense of my very chaotic existence. So I like that part. But I also do think you have to be a nerd unapologetically about whatever you want to do in this life. Like, whatever you like, life is so short and so much of it can be monotonous and droning on and for the service of people who like are real jerks. That you have to be an unapologetic nerd about what you love and go after it and like enrich yourself in whatever way feels interesting to be on this planet before you're gone. Um, and for me, that's this. But like, you know what I mean? But it can be anything. I mean, for and it's other things too. I felt that way about opera too. But like, if everything for us in this world is like feels like it's up for consumption, I need to get as much back out of experiencing this world as I possibly can, or else I'll dry up like a little like withered old like I don't know, sack by the side of the river.
Totally. And I think this idea that we have to gain confidence in the self, for me, like if I thought I needed confidence in the self to do the work, I don't really think that I would be here. So
No.
for what I love about what Sarah's saying, and I agree so much, is that it's almost like confidence is loyalty. That's what the word actually
Yes.
means, the etymology of it. It's with loyalty. And so I think what you said, Sarah, today that we can take away with us like a little wrapped up gift is the fact that you can be loyal to something else. You can be loyal to, I'm going to be loyal to my creative urge, or I'm going to be loyal to the written word above all else. And then our relationship with the self, it goes through so many vicissitudes, and we have so much to work on. It's like we're going to be doing it till we're dead. So sometimes it's good to find something that, like, don't put too much pressure on the self and find something that you love. I love storytelling, or I love, like Sarah's saying, I just wanted to be with the creative and and whatever that meant. I was willing to dip into that field, whether it means going into a group of OBGYNs and being creative with them, or being, like anything, this creativity. And I would say that even if she wasn't gonna publish this journal that she went to write out all that stuff about the fight or flight, or the numbing and everything, it is still sort of filial too, this create, like this expression,
Yeah.
so maybe it's like getting out of the self, and sometimes it's beauty. That's my thing, it's beauty. I want everything to be beautiful. Even if I don't have very much money, I'm gonna get some seeds, plant flowers, and like always fold these blankets up before bed, or whatever it is. So, like, that's kind of what Sarah's trying to say. It's not like she opens up her eyes in the morning and is like, I am great. Ah, I'm
No,
Sarah, or whatever. She really doesn't. I know her
no,
pretty
I'm
well.
a mess.
But she does have a lot of loyalty to this creative urge and making this creative life happen. And
I actually want to say that it's like I actually don't have a lot of confidence in myself, but it's just that I like at some point realized that like nobody does. And like, why do they get to do this? And like, be it like I've worked at hedge funds with crazy people and they're supposedly running the world. Like, I've been in situations where very powerful people who are supposed to be huge smart brain and good people who make all the decisions that affect all of us, they don't know anything. So like what? Then I can't write a Hallmark movie? Yeah, I can figure out how to write a Hallmark movie. Like it's actually not that I believe in the Sarah Montana that strongly at all, but I watched all these white guys, no offense, who like they're not worried about this. Do you know what I mean? They're not worried about it at all. And they're ruining the planet. So like the least I can do is write the stuff I want to write. Like
that's stupid. Yeah, you can sit up there and make these laws. I can make a Hallmark
Yeah,
pin.
Sam Altman gets to create a thing and then not worry that he's going to Jurassic Park our whole planet. And then it's like, just kidding. Now it's for porn. And also, I'm okay with ads, even though I said I'd never do that. Okay, man, I can write whatever I want to write. Like, and that's I don't actually have to like Sarah Montana, am a very messy person who goes through a lot of stuff, who like has a lot of ups and downs, and even going through IVF, like that was an insane experience, right? But like the loyalty is to myself a little bit, but it's mostly to this idea of like, again, I watched these parents who created these like beautiful, there were 2,500 people at my mom and my brother's funeral. Like, and my mom is not somebody who went and got a bunch of fancy degrees from elite institutions. She made a bigger difference than most people I know who have huge accolades, because she was loyal to herself and to this concept of like what's important is community and that I build connections between people. And like, yeah, I just to me that's what confidence is. My mom was never worried about her ability to make connections or that her life had meaning or mattered, even though she was never going to be famous or she didn't even really have a career besides being a volunteer in her community and being a mom, right? Like, and I saw the hole she left. So like I think that's a big piece of this too, is that when you've been through a grief like this and you see that like my parent, like my, I don't know if 2,500 people would come to my funeral, even though I have more accolades than my mom. And that's the thing I think about all the time. I'm turning the age that she was when she died in a couple of months. And like, I think that's another big piece of this is that like all this other stuff about what people think about you and like it just like if you've lost someone, you realize what you remember about them and like what they're like what you connected with about them and what was beautiful about them. And there is a confidence that comes from that. That like nobody is going to remember that won a Christopher Award. Nobody cares. They're not going to remember that about me. They're going to remember who I was in spirit and that, and I get to choose who I am in spirit. Like I want to be somebody that people remember as creative and courageous. And so I have to be creative and courageous. And I think like I want to be somebody that people remember as like laughing and all of these things that you've said about to me are extremely nice things. And they're not things I think about on a daily basis, but they're like I don't know, the weird Greek gods that I've pledged my life to. And so it's nice to hear that I'm a good cleric, you know? Like,
Yeah,
like,
you're a really good cleric.
like,
I love it. Love you. You are so amazing. You've given us so much today, Sarah. This has been just so rich and juicy and beautiful and fun and funny and surprising. And all of what you are has been in this. So thank you for coming. And thank you guys for, I really felt maybe I'm like, off, but I felt this like feeling in the Zoom room today. Like we were all together. It almost felt like we were like at a table or something, or like a living room, and we were all together in this. And you guys really had a play in that with us, I felt. Did you feel that, Sarah?
yes, absolutely. I'm now like, please don't kick me off the Zoom. I want to read all the comments because everybody was
I know,
like
I'm like
having
trying to
such a
read them as
ball.
fast as I can. Yeah, I love you. Thank you so much. How to live. Amazing call. Thank you, thank you. I felt very podcasty.
I would do a podcast with you, Suzanne.
I know. I mean, we've talked about it. I love this so much. Thank you so much to all.
You guys are amazing. No, Suzanne, I love you so much, and I love this whole community so much. Like, this is just like this is sort of what life's about, is connecting with other artists like this, and you know what I mean, figuring out what's worth preserving in the world, you know? So,
Yes, yes, totally. I mean, what else do we have? At least we can come here.
yeah, right? Everything's on fire, but
We
they
can
can't
come.
take this away from us. We've been doing this in caves, man. Like,
Yes, exactly. We've been looking at the stars and making stories forever.
yes.
Oh my God. Well, I adore you guys for coming, and I really love you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Oh my God. I don't think you realize how much you just gave. You are a star. I love you.
I love you.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming. We'll do Daisy next week, and love you, Sarah.